Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. I'd like to welcome you once again into our 46th year of doing both Conversations with Remarkable Minds as a part of our series on progressive ideals. This is the Progressive Commentary Hour. And my guest today is Ray McGovern. Ray, by the way, has served as an Army intelligence officer and CIA analyst for 27 years, under 7 presidential administrations, from John F. Kennedy to George H.W. Bush. And among his duties was preparing the president's daily brief, starting with Ronald Reagan's administration. He also is responsible for the analysis of Soviet intelligence regarding Vietnam. And since leaving the CIA, Ray has been a vocal peace activist, a journalist. He's gotten himself arrested. And he does that with pride. Rather, he believes at the spiritual level and at the activist level that if you took away everything that Ray McGovern stands for and owns, you have taken away nothing that is who he is at his spiritual level, which is a truth seeker. He will not compromise on that. And yet look at how many people within the workplace he inhabited for 27 years were willing to be factionalized, tribalized, weaponized. Some did, and we saw the consequences. Weapons of mass destruction, but they didn't exist. And yet there were some people within the CIA who agreed that they didn't exist, and others who did. So he's done a lot as a journalist, as a veteran intelligence professional for Sanity, VIPS, that he helped create. And that exposes the way intelligence was falsified to so-called justify the war in Iraq and Sam Adams' associates for integrity and intelligence. He also works with Tell the World, or Word. That's an ecumenical Catholic publishing house. And Ray's opinion pieces appear, I think they're brilliant essays, in many leading alternative news sources here and abroad. Oh, by the way, he holds degrees in theology. Don't we wish all of our leaders did? And philosophy from Fordham University. Also has a background in MA in Russian history and a graduate from Harvard Business School, and also has a background in theology from Georgetown University. That's really good. His website is raymcgovern.com, and Ray tweets on X at it's Ray McGovern, or at X at raymcgovern.com. Nice to have you with us again, Ray.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks very much.
In my lifetime, and possibly yours, we have only seen a few instances where the deep state was held accountable, but without consequence. For example, when Senator Church held hearings that were the big to-do, and he brought forward the head of the CIA, and he asked the question, is the CIA involved in our media organizations? The answer was yes. But he didn't go into detail. He didn't tell us all those. But there was a person who was interviewed later who was the head of news at a major network who says, yeah, we work with CIA all the time. Now we're told that never ended. His career ended. They primaried him out. They put a opponent against him, put an unlimited amount of money, and he was gone. So one voice seeking the truth was silent. And others took a message. Mess with the CIA or the deep state, and you too could end your career. But then something happened. We seem to have lost our collective perspective of decency, ethics, morals, manners, common sense, reason, and what has held society together for thousands of years. Collective respect, honoring certain noble traditions, our spiritual values, and also being honest, having a handshake that meant something because you were based upon your character. And when I was growing up, and I know when you were growing up, you were held accountable if you acted out in an inappropriate way. You know, by the time you got home from school, there would be some not very good reward for you.
Don't remind me.
All right. And all of us had to go through that at least once, and then we got that lesson. Today, everything is a battleground. Everything is a measure of contention. So here we have something that I never thought we would see. Now, please understand the context and this is to the larger audience, not to you, because I know that you'll know this immediately. The worse it gets at the institutional level, the more likely it is that we'll see the truth finally emerge. So the more that's exposed, the better it is for those of us who've been talking the truth, looking for the truth, and denied platforms or media to share the truth. Chris Hedges, one example, Abby Martin's another, and there are probably maybe 300 or 400 of us that have been consistent for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and even fewer of us for the last 50 years, as you and I have been. And so now that edifice is cracking. For the first time, the people in power, and what their real motive is, we will not know at this time. But it was Tulsi Gabbard who declassified documents that showed that there was a coup attempt in America. And she named the names, and she showed their positions. And the cabal that met in the White House after they'd been given your intelligence, not you personally, but what you would have known at the time, here's the truth of an intelligence report. We looked, we didn't find that collusion between Russia and Donald Trump as affecting the election, and he decided to throw that away, make up a whole new one, make it up from lies like the different reports, the Steele report. The FBI confirmed that it was lies. So those in power who were honest knew the truth, and those who headed those agencies knew that they were going by lies. And all of them surrounded themselves with sycophants who agreed with them. So no matter what the media wanted to know, they told them exactly what they should know. And so for 4 years, 5 years, these lies were kept alive. Collusion, Russia. But here's what no one talks about. One of the people who knew the truth and did nothing about it was Mike Pompeo, both Secretary of State and head of the CIA. In fact, he is on the record with witnesses saying, let's kill Julian Assange. Now, they didn't do it, but that was from his position as CIA, but they talked about it. Today, that would be a criminal offense. Why wasn't he held accountable? One person in this administration I do not trust, though he has a very nice personality, because he held Tulsi Gabbard's position when he was in the first administration. And yet he found nothing wrong. He never broke any rules. Now he's the head of the CIA, and we've seen nothing come out from the CIA under his leadership. But at the FBI, Patel, yes. Tulsi Gabbard, yes. And the new Attorney General, yes. So at least we have 3 people we can count upon for the first time in my lifetime who are willing to risk their careers to tell us the truth and open up all the doors and say, here's what's behind it. We've never had that. And the media is going against them. They're going against Robert Kennedy. They're trying to do everything they can. No, we want bad vaccines. We want bad medicines. How dare you tell us that sugar-coated cereal is bad? And he's saying, are you crazy? These are bad. And so we then realize how we've been lied to. There's not been a single head of the FDA, CDC, U.S. Public Health Service, USDA, who's been on the side of the public and our health. No Surgeon General. They've all been forced, when they were forced, to concede and say, okay, we'll take that out. Okay, we'll eliminate that. None of this was done voluntarily. It was always done by outsiders or whistleblowers on the inside. You're one such person. So take it from there, pull back, and show us right now what we never thought we would see, the deep state finally, possibly being held accountable. The grand juries, Bolton, he's been indicted, and Comey's been indicted. Whether they'll be found guilty is another matter, and that we'll let the courts decide. But no one's ever gone after these people. Hillary Clinton was in that meeting. She was the author of all this, along with Barack Obama. So, and then a whole Democrat establishment, not the traditional liberal class, but the corporate Democrats, Clinton Democrats, Obama Democrats, supported them. Don't want to see anything happen to them. So start from there currently of what we're finding out, how this impacts you, and what you can add to that. And then we'll take a look at the past 2 decades, our government's foreign interventions from Iraq to Libya and Syria to Afghanistan and Ukraine and beyond, and how they've created a cycle of perpetual war. Despite public fatigue, Both the current Republican and earlier Biden administrations have expanded military operations under the pretext of defending democracy. It's a total fraud. So if you would take us on these two journeys with your unique introspection, please do so.
Sure. Thanks,
The floor is
Gary.
yours, Ray.
There's a lot to dissect there. I'd start out with Julius Caesar, Shakespeare. Quid est veritas? What is truth? Pilate's famous answer, what is truth? Truth doesn't matter. Well, that's what's become of the intelligence community, as well as has been the case before, the political reality in Washington. Let's just say a word about Russiagate. We know now from documentary evidence that it was Hillary Clinton, her brainchild, genius Jake Sullivan, and others who came up with this idea of saying the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee, and they used those to give to Julian Assange so that they could make Trump win and me, Hillary, lose, okay? Now, those charges started coming when Obama pressed for them personally. He couldn't get the CIA, he couldn't get the FBI to validate that, so he went to the Department of Homeland Security. A fellow named Jay Johnson, who was the head of Homeland Security, and they got the always malleable James Clapper, and Obama said in September of 2016, come up with a memo that says the Russians hacked into the DNC to discredit Hillary and make sure she didn't win. And they said, well, we don't have any reports yet. The cyber firm that was supposed to figure out who did the hacking of the DNC, they don't have any report yet. And that's why the FBI and the CIA, why do you want us to do it? Just do it. Now, when I say malleable, that's the word for James Clapper and also for Jay Johnson, a very pleasant black lawyer who zoomed to the top by doing what he was told. They put out a memo in early October, 1 month before the election, saying it's a done deal. The Russians hacked into the DNC, and that's when Russiagate started because the Russians wanted to defeat Hillary, and they succeeded later on. Didn't say that in October. So the campaign was off and running with this hoax, this myth, this lie that the Russians preferred Trump to Hillary Clinton. Now, just as an aside here, Gary, I've been watching Soviet and Russian leaders for half a century very closely, professionally, okay? And there is no Soviet leader that I know of that would have preferred Trump to Hillary Clinton. The last thing that a Soviet or Russian leader wants is somebody who's mercurial, who's unpredictable, who has his fingers on the nuclear codes. Give me a break. That's the one thing they say disqualifies any president from the United States. So the notion that the Russians would have preferred Donald Trump was a discordant note in my own mind. But put that aside. Now, in veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity, which you mentioned before, and which was set up a couple of months before the war in Iraq to warn Bush, just in case he didn't know, that he was being lied to. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And worse still, there were no ties between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, okay? That was the legend. That was the narrative that would persuade people to support this war because, wow, Al-Qaeda, 9/11, so Saddam Hussein was somehow involved in 9/11. Both of them were bald-faced lies, okay? So we sent 3 memos to Bush, hoping he would read them, but to no avail. The war began. Now, as we gathered steam as a unit, as a movement, as veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity, we were joined by all manner of very honest, frustrated intelligence analysts that didn't want these lies to completely dominate the airspace. So, two former technical directors from the National Security Agency, NSA, joined us. Can we help? You sure as hell can help. We have this hacking thing. Take a look at it. See what you know. Well, oh yeah, we'll look at that. We constructed the networks there. Well, we know all about that. Oh, and Ed Snowden has released all those slides in Hong Kong. Yeah, we'll put it together in a week. In a week, they had a VIPS memorandum dated December 12th, 2016, okay? So Trump had just won, but he hadn't taken office yet, okay? And it gave the lie to all this stuff about Russian hacking because it said there's no way in God's creation that it could have been a hack. It had to be a copy from a computer onto a thumb drive or some other external storage device, put in a pocket and given to Julian Assange to publish on WikiLeaks. Now, the reason I mention that is because nobody took note of that. Nobody, not even friendly, not even progressive journalists wanted to take the risk of saying, "Oh, these guys know." I mean, after all, there were two former technical directors, one very senior analyst, three of them testified. We put that memo out, as I say, on the 12th of December 2016. So we knew it was a fraud from the beginning. So what did we learn later? Well, that was December 2016. In December 2017, Devin Nunes, who was sort of the head of the House Intelligence Committee, on his way out because the Congress had turned, okay, he insisted that the head of CrowdStrike, the cyber firm, who was tasked by the FBI for some strange reason, why the FBI didn't do it themselves, to look into the DNC machines and the networks and so forth and find out what happened. Okay, on the 5th of December 2017, Adam Schiff asked the witness, his name is Sean Henry, he was head of CrowdStrike. He had worked for the FBI for 20 years before that. So, Mr. Henry, tell me how it was that the Russians hacked into those computers. And Sean Henry said, well, it was, and his lawyer grabbed him. You're under oath, you're under oath. And so he said, well, actually, Congressman Schiff, we looked at it very thoroughly, but we have no evidence that anyone hacked into the DNC computer. As a matter of fact, not the Russians, not anyone else. It had to have been copied by somebody with access to the DNC computers. Now, I think it's worth at this point in history to say, well, who could that be? There's one named suspect already in view. Oh, who was that? Well, what happened to him? Oh, he was killed just a couple weeks later. He was killed on the 10th of February, 2016. And Julian Assange of WikiLeaks said, we give a $20,000 reward for him. We're not saying he's our source, but we give a $20,000. So in other words, there's a suspect. His name is Seth Rich. And if you want to get people all really upset, you mention that in polite circles and you will be called, you know what, right? A conspiracy theorist. Now, why do I say all that? Because the FBI has had records on Seth Rich that they have been keeping in deep, deep secret since he was killed in 2016, okay? Kash Patel found him, okay? So he knows what the FBI at that point knew about who killed Seth Rich. Am I saying that I suspect that Seth Rich was a casualty of Russiagate? That's precisely what I'm saying. Call me a conspiracy theorist or call me something else. I don't care. There's a confluence here. There's the deep state, FBI being a charter member of the deep state. There's the media. As you say, the media is no good at all anymore. and then there's the Democratic Party. Now, just in defense of myself, so people say, I'm in Trump's pocket. Where I grew up in the Bronx in New York City, in this Irish neighborhood, when I was baptized, membership in the Democratic Party was conveyed at baptism. Now, that's a little apocryphal, but that's almost the way it was. My father adored Franklin Roosevelt. When he died, when FDR died, I remember it's the only time I saw my father cry until my mother died. Okay, that was about 50 years later. So what I'm saying is here, I'm a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party, but I have no regard for what they've become. And to think that the Democrats are inextricably woven into this legend, which ended up with having one person murdered, in my view, that's why there's this really, really emotional response when anybody mentions the name of Seth Rich. Maybe a footnote here. Gary, you won't believe this, but we veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity have a record of saying what this situation with respect to Russiagate was, how it was a fraud in this and that and this connection, okay? And what do you know, all of a sudden, we get subpoenaed. Who's subpoenaing on us? Seth Rich's Democratic lawyers. What do they want to find out? Why you say that Russia didn't hack into the Democratic National Committee? Why you say that? We want all the evidence that here are some examples. We want all the evidence. And so I went to some lawyer friends and I said, give me a break. This is really beyond strange. And lawyers being where they are, it's a subpoena, so you have to reply. Well, the two technical directors, former of the SNSA, this other specialist, and I were all subpoenaed. Everyone complied. We emptied our files but why were they doing this? They were trying to intimidate us from saying, look, it was not a Russian hack. It was an inside job. And as I said before, there's only one named suspect. I'm not saying it's a sure thing, but I'm saying that this is why you have the neuralgic response that you get. I want to make one more thing here. Yeah. When you talk about the media and you talk about Russiagate, there's one person who's a very fine reporter, investigative reporter. His name is Jeff Gerth. Now, I know his work. He used to work for the New York Times in the next cubicle with Cy Hirsch. I talked to Cy, a friend of mine. Cy, he's the best. Jeff is the best. Well, some good-thinking person at the Columbia University Media Center, School of Journalism, or what they call it, invited Jeff Gerth to wrap up Russiagate, do an exhaustive thing. We'll give you a lot of money. We'll give you a year to do it. And so Jeff did. Now, what did he come up with? He came up with a really good product, except what? Except he forgot to include the testimony of the head of CrowdStrike that said there is no physical evidence that the Russians or anyone else hacked before the Schiff Committee, December 5, 2017. Why did they not want that in there? Well, you have to know that Adam Schiff, when he came in January, put that testimony at the bottom of his safe with his own combination for 2.5 years. Finally, somebody says to then President Trump, first term, Mr. President, that testimony is very damaging to those who want to blame Russia for all this. Why don't you have it released? So I can do that. Mr. President, you're president, okay? Or you can tell me to do it. So me, being Ratcliffe at the time, calls Schiff, who is the head of the House Intelligence Committee, and he says, Adam, sorry to tell you this, but we're really tired. We're really tired. You haven't had for 2.5 years. If you don't release it tomorrow, we're going to release it. Release that testimony. That was the 7th of May, 2020. Okay, 2.5 years after the testimony. Guess what? Well, he released it together with about 50 other nondescript memos. And oh my God, the media missed it. You go down the street and ask people if they think the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee. 9 out of 10, well, of course they did. It's all over the media. Don't you read the media, see the media? Well, the reality is they didn't, okay? And that was sort of the crux of the matter very early on. Obama threw out 35 Russian diplomats. And I'll just end with this, Gary. It's consequential, okay? When my friend Jack Matlock, who was ambassador to the Soviet Union, when I was chief of the Soviet foreign policy branch at CIA, he was my opposite number at state, head of the Russian desk, okay? He's the best, okay? And what he said just 2 weeks ago was, look, Russiagate was an incredibly serious, consequential, damage thing to U.S.-Russian relations. It was false from the beginning. The Russians knew it was false. They knew it was contrived. And this is consequential because where we are today in terms of the nadir, in terms of the really bad situation we have with Russia, that's expressly due to Russiagate, as false as it was. But if you look at most Americans, and the president says, well, maybe we have to go into Ukraine now because of those very bad Russians that defeated Hillary and the rest of it. Most Americans, I dare say, would be so brainwashed, I hate to use the term, but, brainwashed, that they might comply and say, oh, the Russians all have horns and Putin can't be trusted and all that business. And if we want to talk about Ukraine, I can give you 5 yards on that as well, but maybe I've said enough for a little while. Thanks for your patience.
No, you're giving us a classroom on the air, as always, Ray. Insightful. Ray, I'd just like some pinpoint observations from you. How is it that Pompeo, head of the CIA, has not been held accountable for suggesting that Julian Assange should be either kidnapped or killed at the British embassy when he was not responsible for leaking anything that was detrimental or national security related? How is it possible that Adam Schiff, in front of a large group of individuals, including one that became a whistleblower now, said that we're going to destroy Trump when he was of the belief that Hillary Clinton had allegedly told him, if I'm elected, you're the next CIA director, and therefore he could do anything he wanted and cover his bases. And yet the media has never once talked about how he told people to leak classified documents, which is a felony. You can't do it. And yet the Biden administration and Obama administration did nothing but leak documents every single day. And now we have it that Adam Schiff was leaking them nonstop. And yet he's being charged with mortgage fraud instead of being a part of this coup and breaking these rules, unless it falls under the statute of limitations, in which case he can walk away from that. So the people who should have been held accountable have not been, yet though Brennan has been indicted. So we'll see what the outcome of this. I'm not aware of any other CIA directors have been indicted. And Clapper lied before Congress. That's been proven. And yet no one did a single thing for his perjury. So we're seeing the people who are in that room, one by one, being brought to some form of formal inquiry. That said, I just like your opinions on that, how much power they had to get away with the crimes against humanity that they did. Could you address that, please?
Yes, Gary, you mentioned Frank Church and the committee and how they faced into things in 1975, all the crimes, not all of them, but many of the crimes that the CIA had perpetrated because they were exempt from being supervised and exempt, in their view, from the law and the Constitution and international law. That all came out real easy, okay? Now, they set up these oversight committees, right, in the House and in the Senate. A couple of years later, it was formally introduced, and they were going to do oversight over CIA covert action and any other important things, right? But they became the overlooked committees, overlooked, oversight in this sense, and they have no courage. Why? They are afraid. Do they have cause to be afraid? Of course they do. It's the deep state you're endangering. They have all manner of ways to get back at you. They are afraid. And it's J. Edgar Hoover all over again. The FBI and the CIA have dirt on every one of those Congress people. They're all afraid. So you can't expect anything from Congress. Now, from whom can you expect something? Well, Trump came in as a new president, right? I hold no brief for President Trump, but I also hold no brief for those who have Trump derangement syndrome, as if he could not possibly, even by mistake, do anything good, okay? What he's done is tried to hold these guys from the deep state accountable. My God, when I heard that James Comey was indicted, I said, my God, this is really throwing down the gauntlet to the deep state, okay? Now, John Brennan, he's also been referred for being indicted to the Justice Department. So Trump has a Justice Department now that can look at these things, judge them however objectively as they can. And in this case, Russiagate, the objective truth is on Trump's side, okay? So it's not a matter of so much of revenge, although there's a touch of that, of course, but they got the law on the side. The big question now is when James Comey is brought to trial, I think it's just kind of weeks away now, whether there'll be a judge and a jury who will convict him as he sorely needs to be convicted. Now, they have him up on two charges, one of lying and the other misleading. They're all kinds of smart lawyers. It's really fancy suits and nice ties who'll be paid billions of dollars to get him off. Do I think they'll succeed? My God, if they don't succeed, it'll be the first time in my experience that they don't succeed. Brennan would be next. Clapper not far behind. So Tulsi Gabbard has done something unique in all of history. Since Frank Church in 1975, she's named names, she's come up with people who are on active duty when John Brennan said, no, people like McGovern and those people that think the Russians would never want an unpredictable president like Trump, they're wrong. We think, well, we have this one guy in wherever he is, and he's really plugged in. We think he's right. He thinks that the Russians want Trump, and what they're going to do is blah, 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 blah. So what I'm saying here is the truth could come out. Do I expect it to? I'm not going to prejudice it by saying the chances are against it, but it's unique in history. Will Tulsi Gabbard survive? I don't know. We haven't heard from her in weeks, even though Venezuela, even though Ukraine, all that, we haven't heard from Tulsi Gabbard. Has she been sequestered? I don't know. But the power is with the deep state, at least up till now. And if Trump takes them on, as he seems to want to, well, even he will not be able to prevail unless there's some kind of a miracle where divine wisdom comes into these judges and juries and says, okay, look, the evidence is very clear. These guys lied through their teeth. It's so easily demonstrable that they did. And if they have good lawyers on the Justice Department side, there's a chance that these guys will go to jail. Did I ever think James Comey would go to jail? No, but Tulsi Gabbard said 3 months ago he should be in jail. I was surprised that she said that. But it's up to the Justice Department, not the intelligence people, to judge that. Let's see what happens. It could be unique in our history.
Good insights. I'm going to shift gears now to Israel and how our entire government at the congressional level and all of the people around the president, whether he's aware of it or not, and he does not have in my opinion, good cognitive ability to discern who is using him. They're all, every single person, Rubio, all of them, are Christian Zionists. And the preceded Zionism, Israeli Zionism, Jewish Zionism, by almost 40 years. We have dismissed all atrocities, all massacres, all crimes against humanity, which does not have a statute of limitations, and supported completely, now with hundreds of billions of dollars in cash and weapons, with no accountability, no audit, Netanyahu. And the world is looking at this, and they're looking at our hegemonic current standing. At the same time, if I'm not mistaken, when Syria was being overtaken by ISIS, and all these vehicles they had, those were American-made vehicles. Remember those long lines, and they had the uniforms on, and the guy with the Rolex watch who was the top emir of all this, and they were they were probably 3 to 4 days away from taking over the capital, and that was it. And then Assad and his family would have escaped, but then Russia interceded. That's the only thing that saved them. And then they pushed them back and pretty much destroyed them. That was not America. That was Russia. In fact, Russia won the Second World War, if anyone's honest about it. America couldn't have done it, and Britain certainly couldn't have done it on their own. And now, after that, then you started seeing in Iraq and in Syria, northern Syria, America came in and took over all their precious oil fields, and where the Ukrainians didn't have the money then to buy the foods that they needed. They were once the breadbasket of the Middle East, but they'd gone through droughts. And then in comes this gentleman, and we saw it, we all saw it, where you put on the orange uniforms, tied the hands and ankles, and then had people standing behind him and cutting off the heads. And you saw them holding up the heads. On all of the different fences were spiked heads, thousands upon thousands of them. And it was sickening. It was the most perverse things that you could imagine. The head person of that entire massacre then recently invaded with the United States support and Israeli support and took out Assad's regime. Now they've gone on butchering Christians and the Waqi tribe, which was Assad's Christian tribe. And he is now made and accepted and recognized by the United States, Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, as the head of Syria. How in the world do you have a man who just years before was a mass murderer, one of the worst in that country's history, and now he puts on a suit and shaves some of his beard and he's recognized? And that wouldn't have happened without Israel. And Israel now looking at the greater Israel, where they want to go back to some mythical time where they had control over Egypt, at least most of northern Egypt and Syria, and also Libya, and not Libya, but Jordan, and they want that for themselves again. So they're going after it, and we seem to be supporting that. There seems to be no stopping Netanyahu in his quest to bring back the original, what they considered their holy lands that God gave them, and purge everything. And 70% at least of the Israeli population agree with get rid of all of them. Now I watched clips from respected journalists and broadcasters in Israel debating, was it the right thing to do to kill all men, women, and children? And they said yes. And I couldn't believe that I was watching this, because these weren't outliers. At the same time, Haaretz and some of the legitimate liberal publications were saying that this is wrong, and some posts on the Jerusalem Post said this is wrong, but they weren't in control. And so the people who had taken homes that did not belong to them, that had been in Palestinian hands for 900 years, orchards, and you see the videos of the settlers coming in and cutting down the olive trees. And then when a person walked out, and there's one in particular, a gentleman went out and said, "Why are you cutting down the trees?" They just shot him right there. And there was an army person right beside him, just shot him and he died. And so the message was, it's no longer your home, it's my home. And if you don't leave within 24 hours, we will kill you. And that brings back what happened in 1947 when 700,000 Palestinians were forced at gunpoint out of their homes. So now they became, in some idiotic way, people without a country, and a country without these people, as if they never existed, rewriting history. And they've got AIPAC that has never had to register as a legitimate lobbyist, but they are, controlling all these elections. You go against AIPAC, you give back the money, as one person recently did, and now they're going to run someone against him, and they got unlimited millions of dollars to do so. So we have one country that controls virtually all of the Middle Eastern our foreign policy. We have this little guy up in Ukraine, that's the second issue. I saw in the Panama Papers where he was listed as being a billionaire, and that was over a decade ago. So how is it that he's able to be unaccounted for? There's not a single audit that's been done to show where the hundreds of billions of dollars we've given have gone. And yet we know where it goes. We see in the end of France, in Monaco, the largest mansions are now owned by people from Ukraine, paying cash for them, $20, $50 million. He has all of his real estate. And yet not a single person will have the courage in Congress to say, haven't we given them enough? No, it's never enough. And so what are your feelings about the utter, complete destruction of any honesty in the American media about what kind of people between Netanyahu and Zelensky are controlling the lives of millions of people and continue to say more war, we're going to win. And yet I see a channel where every single day it's showing how many hundreds of tanks and military equipment and whole stockyards of weapons are being destroyed by the Russians. Oh, and this is in addition to the Russians finally acknowledging to the world that they have the most powerful missile ever developed. It's run off atomic energy, so it can stay in the air for months. It is using plasma technology that we chose not to pay attention to, but they did, so it's virtually invisible. It can go over 7,000 miles an hour, and it has enormous payload. And yet we're saying Zelensky can win, and they're not understanding what the Russian philosophy here is. You know the Russian philosophy. You know Putin and how he thinks. That was one of your specialties. So give us a primer on these two separate parts of the world with two people who by any definition would reasonably be considered sociopathic. Your thoughts, please.
Well, Gary, going to Gaza first, which I think is the most, should be on the top of everybody's list. You spoke of one country trying to dominate the whole area. Well, it's really two countries, or they act as one country, and that's the United States and Israel. Israel has been running our foreign policy toward that area in the world for a very long time, ever since 1948, when Israel was established. I was a young boy, 9 years old, in the Bronx, and guess what? There were incredible parades and all kinds of celebrations. The Jews, who had been so massacred during World War II, finally had a country. There was a country with no people in it, and they were going to be peopling this country. And no one told me. No one told me for decades that there are already 700,000 people living there who were either massacred or driven into places like Gaza, okay? Then, when I was a professional working on Soviet foreign policy in the CIA, I saw what happened to the USS Liberty. Premeditated attack, June 8th, 1967, 24 U.S. sailors killed, 174 U.S. sailors badly wounded. A direct attack, we know it because we have the intercepts between pilot and command center. But that's an American flag. That's an American ship. Follow your orders. Boom, boom, boom. It was only broken off because one sailor from Texas, his name was Terry Halbardier, went to Captain McGonigal and he said, Captain McGonigal, I think I can get that radar working that they haven't knocked out because it wasn't working then, but I think he said, what are you going to do? Swim across that napalm that they put on our deck? Sir, request permission. Permission granted. He got an SOS out, long story short. They broke up the attack, and when the U.S. Navy sent its aircraft carriers closer and launched its planes, LBJ and McNamara, the defense secretary, said, pull those planes back. We don't want to embarrass our ally, Israel. My God. I know a lot of those USS Liberty survivors. I have this little cup here. I don't know if you can see it. I used to go to their reunions, okay? And if you want to see what PTSD is like, talk to one of those survivors who were told, under pain of court-martial, you are not to mention that to your wife, to your friends, to your children, or even to one another, okay? Because we don't want it out that Israel attacked. Now, that proved to me that Israel felt that it could get away, literally, it could get away with murder, including U.S. sailors. 1967. Fast forward 2021. Netanyahu is comfortably in an Israeli living room. He's being feted and praised and all. And he says, hey, turn off that video camera. He forgot to turn it off, okay? What does Netanyahu say? We can do anything because the Americans will support us no matter what. It's strange, says Netanyahu. 80% of the American people will support us no matter what. It's ridiculous. Well, that was 2001. I don't think it's 80% anymore, Gary. And I think the hope is there. The hope is that you and other progressive media outlets are spreading enough truth around that it's probably around 50% or getting even lower of Americans that support genocide, my God. Genocide. Think about it, okay? So that's the hope. Now, how about the media, the mainstream or the traditional media? Well, they are so influenced by Zionists in control of those media. It's not any secret. You just look at who owns these companies. Not only Zionists, but people who profiteer on making weapons. These mega corporations, they have a little news bureau, right? The news bureau is a profit center that counts at 1% of its profits. Okay, making submarines or helicopters or whatever. Accounts for 99% of their profits. So we're in a bind. The good news is that people like you and people like Judge Napolitano, on whose show I appear twice a week, are spreading enough truth around that millions of people are getting a different story. It's going to take some time, but okay, you said Ukraine. I should say something about that too. Maybe the main message I'll just leave with people is when Biden said, you think Putin's going to stop at Ukraine? Oh my God. No, he's not going to. He's going to go take Poland, and then he's going to take the Baltic states. You watch. He's not going to stop. Well, Americans, please listen to me, okay? Putin already stopped. Oh, okay. No. Listen, please, okay? He was, in my view, provoked into invading Ukraine. And on the very next day, he made sure that Zelensky knew he was willing to deal. Zelensky picked his best friend, a fellow named David Arhamia, okay, and sent him up to Belarus, where he conversed, negotiated with the peoples personally appointed by Putin. Then they came to Istanbul, and the Russians stopped. You remember all those tanks they had at the road to Kiev? Why did they stop? I thought it was a crazy thing to do because, well, a military guy at one point, enfilade, you could take out all those tanks with one aircraft, okay? No, they stopped. Why did they stop? Because the negotiations succeeded. Arachamia, Zelensky's guy, and Putin's guy, initial this thing: no Ukraine and NATO, okay? Limits on armaments in Ukraine and Russia at that point, and a ceasefire. We deal with Crimea and the other things later. How about the Donbass, part of Ukraine? Just give the Russian-speaking people a fairer deal than the coup management had done. It was all done. It was there. And then comes Boris Johnson from the UK, and he says to Zelensky, "You trust those Russians?" No, I don't. Well, listen, if you go with us, if you keep that war going, we'll give you the support up to kazoo for as long as it takes. Well, now as long as it takes, but the teaching point here is simply the Russians stopped when they scared the hell out of Zelensky with only 90,000 troops. It wasn't a full-scale invasion. They got what they wanted. Zelensky had his person initial list, and that person, David Arachamia, has confirmed to the Ukrainian press exactly what I just said. Boris Johnson came in, and it was all over. Now, that was April 2022, okay? Next thing you know, 2 years ago, July 2023, the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, gets up before the EU Parliament, mind you, and he says, this is what happened. The Russians said that if you keep trying to get Ukraine into NATO, we will have to invade Ukraine. And we said, no. And so he invaded Ukraine. But his objective was to prevent NATO enlargement. And we got Finland and we got Sweden. So we got 2 new countries in there. Give me a break, Gary. 1 million Ukrainian youth had been killed by that time. Several, maybe 100,000 Russians as well. Is that kind of leadership we have in NATO? Well, I'm afraid it is. So my point is simply, he admitted, look, the Russian condition was no Ukraine in NATO. They've been saying that since 2008 when they told Bill Burns, our ambassador then in Moscow, later CIA chief, they told Bill Burns, look, Bill, do you know what "niet" means? "Niet" means "niet." We have one red line. The red line is Ukraine in NATO. Tell your people. So he wrote back to Condoleezza Rice with that title, okay? Russians say "niet" means "niet" on Ukraine accession to NATO. So it's very, very clear what the analogy I draw, and I'll end with this, is Ukraine armed to the teeth, which NATO did between the coup in 2014 until now, okay, armed to the teeth right on the border of Russia in the traditional places where people like Napoleon and Hitler went right into the Soviet Union or Russia. Well, that's the same. Mind you, this is an analogy that people forget. It's the same as what President Kennedy, who drew me down to Washington in the first instance, President Kennedy experienced when Khrushchev thought he could put the same kind of threat into Cuba with medium-range ballistic missiles that would only take 8 or 9 minutes to get to Washington or Savannah, or wherever the naval ports were, okay? Now, what am I saying? I'm saying that when a great power is threatened with an existential threat, 9 minutes, and these intermediate-range ballistic missiles were armed with nuclear warheads. We learned 30 years later, my God, we didn't know it at the time. I was just on active duty with the Army at the time. So what happens? So Kennedy says to Khrushchev, look, this is an existential threat for us. I don't know what gave you the idea that you could get away with this. Take those missiles out. And they deal adroitly. They had a previous ambassador to Russia, Llewellyn Thompson, an incredibly good diplomat, Kennedy depended on him and the likes rather than the Joint Chiefs of Staff who wanted to get into a war with Russia. This would end the communism for once and good. Okay, so what happens? Bobby Kennedy and KGB guy that they talked to, they worked it out in other channels so that Khrushchev would be able to tell his military, look, the U.S. is going to pull out its missiles from Turkey. They don't want they don't want it to be a quid pro quo, but they will. I trust Kennedy. Whoa! They pull their missiles out. So that's what happens when a great power feels an existential threat from somebody who comes into their domain and threatens them with annihilation by missiles that can reach Washington in 9 minutes, okay? Now, the situation in Europe now is that if these hypersonic missiles are finally gotten by Washington, the U.S. for some reason hadn't been able to develop them, but they will. If they put them in Ukraine, how many minutes does Putin have to decide whether to blow up the rest of the world? I'll give you a hint. 5, okay? 5. So it's a very complicated story, pretty basic. If you compare Cuba and you compare Ukraine, it's a very, very similar situation. A great power that has the power to prevent an existential threat is going to do it, particularly if they're provoked.
Ray, thank you very much. This is real enlightening. Of course, we're leaving out of this equation that both Russia and China have the capacity to turn off all of our electricity through cyber warfare without ever having fired a shot of any missile, and that they have not put on the table, and we're not even thinking about what they could do without going into a full military conflict. That's for another discussion. Thank you very much, Ray. We look forward to another talk. You've been very enlightening to us on this one.
Thank you, Gary. Take care now.
Thank you all very much for watching, and if you feel that you've benefited from this, please share this with other people. All right? I look forward to our next conversation. You've just been listening to Ray McGovern. Have a nice day, everyone.